Hello everyone, welcome to this video integrating Amazon RDS with workloads running on VMware Cloud and AWS. My name is Satya Shrestha. I am a senior staff multi-cloud solutions architect here at VMware. In this video, I'll show you how quickly and easily we can integrate Amazon RDS with workloads running on VMware Cloud and AWS. First of all, let's look at the common use cases for this integration. The first use case is our customers integrating their existing Amazon RDS databases with VMware workloads or application servers sitting on VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. The next common use case is our customers modernizing their existing databases on VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC or on-premises by moving them to Amazon RDS. Next one is migrating storage-heavy databases from VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC or on-premises to Amazon RDS. So customers may have terabytes of databases sitting on VMware SDDC or on-prem, and if they want to migrate that databases and leverage Amazon RDS, that is another use case. Building net new databases on Amazon RDS and accessing them from VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC is another use case. And creating a replicated databases that sits on either VMware Cloud AWS or Amazon RDS and then replicates between each other. So if in case they want to use it as a read replica or use it as a DR strategy, that can also be done. So let's have a quick look at what we are trying to achieve here in this video. We'll create an Rds instance, as you can see on right hand side here, in a customer managed VPC. We already have VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC that's also sitting on the AWS Cloud, and we have some logical segments where our application servers are sitting, and those logical segments are NSXT logical segments, as you can see here in this diagram. And from that logical segment, from that application server or web server, we will be accessing database on Amazon RDS. So here you can see hybrid app DB is the database that we will be creating and accessing that database instance from one of the virtual machine or workload sitting on one of these logical segments. All right, let's go to the console and see how we exactly do this. Okay, so I'm actually logged onto VMware Cloud console, as you can see here. Now what I need to do is I need to go to the organization that's where my SDDC is currently residing. So that would be multi-cloud demo lab. Now in here, I have quite a few services here in this console, and I'm interested on VMware Cloud and AWS. I'm going to click launch service here. So in this console, I'm going to click on view details. And from here, I'm going to open my Vcenter. We'll be using VMware Cloud admin at vmc.local user. I'm going to click on open Vcenter. All right, now on VMware Vcenter console, I'm going to use my username and password, cloud admin at vmc.local, and I do have a password here. Login. All right, so what we have here is the usual Vcenter console. This is the name of my SDDC Vcenter, and then I have a workload running here, and it's in hybrid app resource pool, hybrid app RP. And this is the web server that we'll be using to access Rds instance. So just take a note of this IP address here, 10.123.12.3. That is the IP address of this virtual machine. And this IP address of this virtual machine will be accessing Rds sitting on customer managed VPC. Okay, let's have a quick look of the console of this virtual machine. I do have a public access to this virtual machine. I'll show you how that public access has been done. Let's have a quick look of how I actually made this virtual machine publicly available on VMware Cloud Console. So here, let's go to networking and security. This is where most of the NSX related tasks are done here, and networking and security related tasks are done here. Click on public IP. What I have done is actually I requested a new public IP, just like clicking on this button. I just gave a note for that one. And then when I click on save, it automatically requests IP from Amazon, and it gives us an IP address. So here in this example, you can see that I have got this IP address 35.83.166.176. This public IP is actually associated with my Linux virtual machine. Now, this step just gives me the public IP address. What I need to do is then go to netting here on the network, go to net, and I have to create a netting here with that public IP that actually nets to a private IP address. And as we saw earlier, the private IP address for this virtual machine is 10.123.12.3. What I did then was I created a net rule. And as you can see here, this Linux hybrid app with a public IP address that we requested 35.83.166.176. All the requests, all the port requests for this IP address are translated then to 10.123.12.3, which is our internal private network, which is the virtual machine we saw earlier here. So let's copy this IP address and then just try to access it from here. So at the moment, there's nothing. This is Debian Linux server, and the Apache, we haven't put any index.html or anything like that. So what we'll do here is we will actually create a WordPress site, and then front end will be WordPress site. That WordPress site will be sitting on this virtual machine, and we will actually host the databases for that WordPress site in Amazon RDS. Now, let's go to Amazon RDS and then see how we create a database here. To create a database, all you need to do is click on this Create Database button here, or you can go to DB Instances and then click on Create Database. Actually, I have already created a hybrid app DB Rds instance, which is a MySQL Community Edition DB instance, and it resides on US West 2B, right? So let me just quickly walk through how I did that. So click on Create Database. I selected Standard Create. I selected MySQL Database and MySQL Community Edition. My version, I just left it as is, whatever the version is there. Now, in templates, I use dev and test. We are not using this as a production database because it's just a demo and a lab environment. So I just selected dev tier, dev and test. If you select production, it will ask you to create it as a multi-agent DB instance for high availability. For this case, dev and test to minimize the pricing or the cost, and then single DB instance. Then for DB instance identifier, I just use it as a hybrid app DB. That is the name of my RDS instance. Then credential, I use the default master username and then my password. Now for instance configuration, I used Broad Stable class. Again, I just want to minimize my cost here for this lab database. I just selected DB T3 Micro, which is the smallest here with 2 vCPUs, 1 GB RAM, and network throughput of 2085 Mbps. Then for storage, I left it as is, general purpose SSD with 20 GB of disk allocated. I left storage scaling as is, enable storage auto scaling, and also left 1000 here for maximum storage threshold. Now for connectivity, use the VPC where you want this RDS to sit. Now, for our case, we must select the VPC that we connected during the SDDC creation. So when you create VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC, at the time it asks you for a VPC and a subnet. So you choose exactly the same VPC and same subnet. Now, in my case, the VPC is MCA VPC demo. That's where the RDS will sit. And also the VMC SDDC is also already sitting here, right? It's connected to this VPC. Subnet group, we left it as is. Now for public access, we don't want it to be publicly accessible and only accessible from internal private IP ranges, including the VMC SDDC IP ranges. So I left it at no. VPC security group, I chose existing VPC security group because I have created a VPC security group called Hybrid App DB again. We'll have a quick look on what's in there in a bit. So I selected that and remove this default. For availability zone, again, be careful about the availability zone. Select the same availability zone where your SDDC sits, right? In my case, let's have a quick look where my SDDC sits. Click on connected VPC. Okay, so this is the VPC with 2F8A47 ending with that. And VPC subnet, US West 2B, right? That's the subnet that we should be using for RDS creation as well. Let's go and select that, US West 2B. So in RDS console, for AZ, that was US West 2B. So when we do this, what happens is both SDDC and your RDS are sitting on the same VPC, same AZ. That means you won't have any egress charges when you are actually accessing your database from your VMware Cloud and AWS SDDC workloads. Okay, so that's very important. Now for database authentication, we use password as well as IAM database authentication. And additional configuration, I left it as is, didn't touch at all. We do have a backup for retention. We want to keep it for 7 days. Backup window, I just left it as is. For KMS and encryption, as is again. Monitoring, also all default. Everything as is default. Now I've already created this database instance, so I'm not going to go ahead with create database instance here. Now I'm going to cancel out from here. Let's have a quick look at my DB, which is already here. This is database instance I've created earlier. Now, what I wanted to show you is the security group we saw earlier. Now, this is the security group that we have associated, Hybrid App DB. Let's have a quick look on what is in that security group. So clicking on that security group will bring me to the security group page. Let's look at inbound rule. This is where we configure the firewall rule. I added an inbound rule. Anything coming from 10.123.12.0/24. So this is the NSXT segment that is in our lab environment. So anything that is coming from this IP address to port 3306, which is my MySQL port, it will allow access to that. Outbound rule, I haven't touched anything. I kept it as is, just like that. Now, if I go here to segments in VMware Cloud S3C, so my segment is called Hybrid App LS, and that segment is 10.123.12.1, and that is the gateway address. So this is my segment, right? And what I've done is I have actually allowed this segment to access Rds DB instance on my security group rule here on AWS. That's what we have done here. Now, this is not enough. What we need to do is we have to configure a gateway firewall rule also here on VMware Cloud S3C to allow traffic flowing between that logical segment where our workload sits and connected VPC. So for my case, what I have done here is this is the rule I have created. Now, in this rule, any sources can access this logical segment, right? So this is my logical segment. If I click that one, you will see that logical segment has these attributes here. So anything coming to this 10.23.12.1, the whole range, they will be able to access these services here. So a couple of services, HTTPS, and there's a few more here. Now, in terms of outgoing from this logical segment, you can see here, Hybrid App logical segment 1 outgoing. For that segment, I want it to go out anywhere, right? So that means anywhere, any destination, and also any services. And all uplinks means including the VPC interface. You can see there are a lot of different interfaces here. So when you say all uplinks, it goes through everything, including the VPC interface. That means it will be able to talk to the Rds instance sitting on VPC interface. So once this is done, the traffic flows well. Now let's have a quick look on my instance if I can access that publicly. So I have the public IP address already, and I can actually SSH to this virtual machine through the public IP that we saw earlier. Now let's go to the terminal. I have actually SSH to that machine before, so I'm just grabbing my previous command. I have a user called Satya, and that public IP address that has been netted to my Linux virtual machine. So I'm just going to SSH there. So now I'm actually logged onto that virtual machine. And in this virtual machine, Linux Hybrid App 01, let's just quickly have a look at the IP configuration. Okay, so this virtual machine, as you can see here, is 10.123.12.3. That is the internal private IP address, as you saw here. In my vCenter console is this virtual machine with this IP address I'm accessing from my terminal here. All right, so we are on that terminal. Now, what I'm going to do here is a couple of things. So first of all, let's see if I can connect to the Rds DB instance. Again, I have actually done this before, so I'm just going to go up arrow key here. I have MySQL client installed on this instance. So here you can see what I'm trying to do here is connecting using MySQL client with user admin. And my database is this Rds instance that we saw earlier. And if I go to that Rds console, so the endpoint of that Rds instance is Hybrid App DB. There is this unique ID here, and then US West 2 rds.amazon.com, and it's listening to port 3306. So what I'm doing here in my terminal is basically with MySQL client using admin user, which is the most powerful user here, connecting to that Rds instance, and then with password. So I'm going to enter my password here. I'm connected to that Rds instance. So I'm going to check what databases are already there. Earlier, I had created a database called Hybrid DB, just a dummy, simple database. Let's have a quick look at that DB. I'm going to use that DB. And then let's have a look at tables. There's only one table, simple student table. So I selected all records from student, and you can see there are a few records that I have entered earlier. Now, what it means is I can actually connect to this database instance from this Linux virtual machine, right? So it shows that I can connect to this Rds instance from my virtual machine sitting in Vcenter. So basically, this virtual machine is talking to Rds instance here on the same account. Let's have a quick look on my diagram earlier. So what we saw earlier is that we have this Rds instance hybrid app DB, and we actually connected to this DB instance from a logical NS60 logical segment sitting on this network side range, right? And my IP address was 10.123.12.3. That was the virtual machine that accessed the Rds DB instance. Now, one important thing I want to mention here is about this ENI. How does the traffic flow between these two, VMC on AWS, SCDC, and customer managed VPC, and Rds sitting in there? I showed you the firewall configuration, how the firewall has been configured on both ends. Now, let's have a quick look at this construct called ENI. The traffic here is being routed through ENI. So when we create VMware Cloud and AWS SCDC, we also inject ENIs into the customer managed VPC. Let's have a quick look on that ENI construct very, very quickly. Now let's go to Amazon console. Let's go to EC2. Now under EC2, if you go to network and security, click on network interfaces. Under network interfaces, you can see lots of elastic network interfaces here, right? It belongs to various different things. Now, what I'm interested in is the ENIs that are associated with my VMware interfaces that has been injected when the SCDC is created. You can see there are plenty of them. Let's just filter it quickly with VMware VMC interface. Now, when I filtered it, what I could see here is it has actually filtered quite a few of them here, right? And all of them are sitting on US West 2B. So when VMware SCDC is created, it actually creates these elastic network interfaces here. And all the traffic between AWS services, all the AWS services, including Rds, is actually going through this elastic network interface. All right, so let's have a quick look at the Rds elastic interfaces, elastic network interfaces. I'm going to clear this filter. And I saw there was a couple of them from Rds. All right, yeah. You can see this Rds network interface, and that is also associated with hybrid FDB, which is RDB, right? So this Rds instance also has an ENI associated with it, and it's in use, right? So we saw a few in use, a few are from VMware Cloud AWS SCDC, and a few are from Rds here. One thing I want to mention here is since this Rds instance sits on that subnet, it gets an IP range from that subnet, 10.223.186. It's again private range. The general best practice is not to use private IP addresses for Amazon services, even if it's private, right? Always to use the FQDN. If you noticed earlier, when I did my MySQL command here in terminal, what I did was I actually connected from this virtual machine to Rds using the FQDN, the endpoint. So this is the best practice. Always use the endpoint, not the private IP address. All right, so that's that. And one more thing I want to mention here while I'm on AWS console is the route table for the VPC. Let's quickly go to VPC. Here I'm in the VPC. Right, there are various VPCs here. We go to the default VPC. This is the default VPC. We saw that earlier also. MC VPC demo, click on that. Now, what I'm interested here is the route table. Now, this is the default VPC, and this is where both our Rds instance and VMware Cloud and SCDC sits. And it has a main route table, default route table that is. I'm going to click on that one. Now, what I want to show you is in this route table, let's have a quick look at routes. If I click on routes, you'll see lots of different routes here, right? Now, one of the routes here is the route from our NSXT segment where our application server or web server is sitting. If you could remember, our IP address of this web server is 10.123.12.3. So the range is 10.123.12. If you see here, 10.123.12 is also here. So what that means is anything coming from this logical segment sitting on VMware Cloud and AWS is routable, and it can reach anything sitting on the AWS side, right? That's exactly what it's saying here. Okay, so route table very important. And for that VPC, that default route table has this route table entry. That's what makes the traffic flow possible. Okay, now let's get back to the main thing here. Now, what we saw earlier was basically a simple basic connection to the hybrid app DB, Rds DB instance from my app server or web server, whatever you want to call it, Linux hybrid app, just like that. Now, what I'm going to do to make it a little bit interesting is I'm going to connect to that Rds DB instance, and we will try to actually install WordPress application and have Rds as a database server or backend for that WordPress application, right? So WordPress will be sitting on this Linux machine, but Rds will be hosting a database for WordPress. Let's do that. All right, first of all, what I need to do is create a user for WordPress. Just setting the users. I don't want to use the generic admin user, which is a very powerful user here for this DB instance. So to make it a little bit secure, I'm going to create a user for my WordPress DB, just for the WordPress application. All right, let's create a WordPress database for our WordPress application in RDS. For that, I'm going to log on to my Rds DB instance using the admin. Okay, so at the moment, I only have that hybrid DB database that we saw earlier. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a WordPress database called WordPress DB. Now, I'm going to invoke this command here, create database WordPress DB, right? So now if I go and say so database again, now you will see WordPress DB that is already created. And we also created a user called WordPress admin at localhost identified by a password. Now we'll grant all privileges to WordPress admin user to the WordPress DB database. Now we will flush the privileges. Now to connect to this WordPress DB from any host, we will execute this command, create user WordPress admin at % identified by password, which is the same password we used earlier. This will allow me to connect it from the application server. Now let's connect to this Rds DB instance and connect it with the WordPress admin user we created earlier. We are logged in there now. And with this user, we will see what databases is visible for this user. With the command show databases, as you can see, we can only access WordPress DB database. And then if I use the database and see what's inside the database, we can just use show tables command, and it's an empty data set, empty database, there's nothing there. Now let's go to Apache document root, which is var www.html. If I go and say ls, there's nothing there, it's empty at the moment. So what we need to do is download the WordPress installation in this location. So I'll just use the general wget command to get the WordPress installation file. And it is showing me permission denied, so I'll just need to go there and sudo it as a root user. I'm just downloading the WordPress installation here. Once that is downloaded, then we will need to untar it. You can see that latest.tar.gz has been downloaded. Now what I will do is I'll just sudo su dash, so execute all the commands as root, so it's a little easier. Again, cd var www/html, and inside that folder I'm going to untar that latest.tar.gz file. I'm just checking the permissions on the latest.tar.gz here. Now to untar, we'll just do tar xfz latest.tar.gz. When it untarred it, it created that WordPress folder. That's where all the WordPress contents are, including all the installation file. Now we'll move the content of WordPress folder to the document root of Apache with move command. And as you can see, all the files and folders have been moved here now. And then I don't need that latest.tar.gz file anymore, so I'm going to remove that. Now we'll make a copy of wp-config sample file and name it wp-config.php. That's the configuration file we need to modify for WordPress settings. Now we're going to nano wp-config and then edit some values here. So first of all, we'll be editing the value for DB name. The DB name is WordPress_DB. That's what we created earlier. And then the DB user is WordPress_admin. And the password also, we will set the password we set earlier. And for the DB host, we will replace the DB host with our Rds DB instance DNS name. Okay, so the config file is all modified. We will go ahead and save this file. Now what we need to do is WordPress uses PHP, so we need to install PHP for this one. I may have already installed the PHP here, but let's go ahead and then execute the commands that is used for PHP installation. So apt install PHP and libapache mod PHP as well as PHP MySQL. So since I have already installed it, just went ahead and did nothing, but you can use the exact command here to install PHP. And then to check the PHP version and see PHP is working fine, just use php-v As you can see here, you can see the PHP is installed, and that is the version for PHP here. Now, once that is done, a couple of things we need to do is inside this www.html, what we need to do is we need to actually change the owner, because Apache runs with a user www-data and the group www-data. So what I'm doing here is changing the owner for that WP content folder recursively. And once that is done, I'm going to create a folder called uploads. That's where images, etc., are uploaded from WordPress. So I'm creating an upload directory there, and then just changing the permission for it to be writable by WordPress or the user. Now we're good to go ahead and start installing the WordPress in my Firefox browser. I'll just type in my public IP address of my application server. As soon as I go there, we can see the WordPress installation widget now. Let's fill in these fields with correct details. For site title, VMC on AWS with RDS. Just simple. It's asking me to create the WordPress username. I'll just say WordPress admin, same as the database. That's my password there. Come with a weak password, that's fine. That's my email. I don't want this to be searchable from search engine, so I'm discarding that. And from here, I'm just going to go here and say install WordPress. The WordPress is successfully installed, as you can see here. Now, before I log into the WordPress site, let's have a look at my database, what happened to the database, right? And let's connect to the Rds instance once again. Once logged on, let's have a look. WordPress DB. Earlier, everything was empty. Let's see what happens here. Now you can see this Rds database instance has this WordPress DB that is now populated with the tables. These are all WordPress tables, right? Now what I'm going to do here is let's create some sample posts here. Login first. And this is my WordPress admin console. Now in terms of posts, you can see here, these are the default posts, says hello world, etc. If I go here and just paste that IP address here and enter, you can see the sample WordPress site. And this text, etc., actually are coming from the Rds DB instance. So let's do a couple of posts and we should be done here. I'm going to just create a simple post here, a WordPress post. For that, let's go here. This hello world, we are seeing here hello world. I'm just going to change this article. Edit. And instead of hello world, we're just going to say it and then some sample text. Actually, let's insert an image here. Image, upload. I have an image here, Amazon RDS and VMC and AWS. Add more section, paragraph, some lines, and we'll just update it. Okay, Amazon RDS integration with VMC and AWS. Now, if I go here on my site and just refresh it, then hello page has become like this. So if I click on here, you will see the full article. So there we go. We actually install the WordPress on the virtual machine sitting on VMC and AWS SDDC and the Rds DB instance. Now, if I see there is one connection happening here, you can see from monitoring, there is a connection to this DB, one connection, right? Before we end this video, let's quickly check the WordPress database and see the values that we have updated from the WordPress site is getting reflected here on WordPress tables. So I'm going to check that WP post. We'll just describe the WP post table, and we'll get some fields here like post date and also post title, and see if those values have been updated in these tables. So select post date, post title from WP post. As you can see, the Amazon RDS integration with VMC and AWS post that we updated earlier is properly recorded on the WP post table. Thank you for watching this video and staying until the end with me. We look forward to seeing you again. Bye for now.